left the normal Dar al-Islam countries for reasons of employment, opportunity, to better their life, to come to the Americas. But the situation they found was not necessarily what they expected. Not in the sense that they couldn't work or they could not build homes, but one of the problems that they were facing was passing on Islam to the next generation. And this, of course, is always a problem for Muslims when they are living in a minority situation. And that is the fact that the parents who may have come out of a religious family, they may have even had a scholar, Hafiz, as one of their family members. They can recall the masjids, they can recall the large gathering of Salatul Eid. They have a solid foundation within Islam. But the next generation who has grown up overseas, who do not have that contact with the original language or the original culture, Islam to them becomes sort of a distant memory. And so it is a challenge. Can we bring scholars from overseas? In those days, in the 19th century, earlier 20th century, it was very difficult. The lands of Islam were undergoing major changes in the colonial period, and it was not easy. These are new languages being spoken, English, French. Many of the scholars did not necessarily speak those languages. And so many of the families left Canada and started to go south, even from the Midwest of the United States, starting to go south. First going, of course, west to California, and then going south down into Mexico and Latin America. Now, if you look at the map here, you will see what America was back in the 18th century and the early times. And you'll see that the area of California going down into the southwest of the United States and Mexico, that was all considered part of New Spain. It was Mexico. That was a Spanish territory. It was not the United States. And so there was a cultural connection between the people who lived out in that area. The 13 colonies eventually took over the middle of America that was called Louisiana. They took over that part and then carved out what is now the United States. But the Muslims then, who were able to go through cultural barriers, entered into the Spanish territories and started to go south in the Spanish territories. And once you're able to learn the Spanish language, there were some Muslims who may have come from Morocco, from Ceuta, or certain sections where they still speak Spanish. But generally Muslims were speaking other languages. But once you know Italian or French and you're an immigrant, you can pick it up. And so the Muslims then entered into these territories and started to go south. They traveled down into South America, what was now New Granada, and then into Brazil. And with the expulsion of Muslims from the territories in the Middle East, and with rising problems, World War II, and the results of World War II, there were more Muslims coming across on the boats. This is, to many people, a hidden population. It is something not known, and it is part of what we call deeper roots. The concept of deeper roots is, we are Muslims here in these lands. What is the foundation of our Islam? What are the roots that were laid down before us in this community? We're not new to these lands. Many people judge our presence by the past 20 years. We are not new to these lands. We have been here for a long time. This part is a very interesting understanding. And it gives us that information that Arabic-speaking people actually went down into the Spanish territories, going down into what is now Colombia, Venezuela, and to Peru and to Argentina. And now, up until now, it is understood that 5% of Latin America, meaning the Spanish lands, is actually of Arabic-speaking origin. The majority still would be Christians or other religions, but still Muslims make up a large population within the Arab diaspora. And this is about 25 to 30 million people are Arabic-speaking in Latin America and down in South America. It can vary from 2% in Uruguay, and in Argentina it was 9%. I was part of a group of people, of du'at, who were sent into Latin America. And we were looking for Muslims. And so we reached Belize, which is British Honduras. It's English-speaking. And then we went into Honduras. And we went to the city of Tegucigalpa. And one of the brothers, Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Khabir, Jazakallah khair, who's studied in Mecca, he's Panamanian, so he speaks Spanish. And so we were moving in Tegucigalpa, in Honduras. And we're looking for Muslims. And we went down into the city. There were no masjids that were there. And we looked for Arabic names or Muslim names written in Spanish, because you can see it in the marketplace, in the name on the store. So we found a shopkeeper, and he was a Palestinian brother, Philistini min al-Quds. He was from Jerusalem, and he was there, and he was holding Jumu'ah Salat in his home. So we went to his home in Tegucigalpa. From his outward appearance, you could not distinguish between him and between another person in the Honduras population. But he was Muslim, Arabic speaking. We spoke to him in Arabic, and we sat down, we had lunch, we made prayers. He told us he was trying to get a masjid and organize a community there in Honduras. But the challenge he faces, his wife is Spanish. She embraced Islam. How do you pass on Islam to your children? This is a major struggle that people are going through. In Nicaragua, there are Arabic-speaking business people. In Costa Rica, there are Arabic-speaking people. In Panama, there is a large Muslim community, especially because of the Panama Canal. And when the canal was opened, which connected the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean, many Muslims came into that area. And we actually were with Palestinians, had big businesses. There was Bengali Masjid. There were different communities that were there in the Panama Canal region. Then further you go down into South America, and you see some very interesting things. To give you some statistics, some startling statistics of the Arabic-speaking people in Latin America. The richest man in the world right now is Carlos Slim, right? Now, just like our Imam Slimi, right, in Brampton, this is probably a mispronunciation of the word Salim. Okay, so this looks like slim. You would say slim in English, but it's really Salim. Like his name, he's Maghribi, he says Slimi. Right, so this Carlos Slim, he's a Christian. He's the richest man on earth right now. He's Lebanese. Lebanese-Mexican. A president of the Argentina before Carlos Menem was Syrian origin. 3 presidents of Ecuador were Lebanese. One of the presidents of Colombia, Julio Tubey, he was also Lebanese. A vice president of Uruguay and another of Brazil were Lebanese. At least 2 Central American presidents were of Palestinian origin. And this is an amazing thing. I lived on the island of Jamaica for a number of years doing dawah. And at that time, the prime minister of Jamaica, his name was Edward Seaga. And he was like a silversmith. He was Lebanese. He was the prime minister of Jamaica and one of the most powerful men in the Caribbean region. Of course, his mother was Da Costa. And this is an interesting historical thing we found. Da Costa is Portuguese name. And when you find somebody in the Caribbean who has a Portuguese name, either they are Morenos, they are, remember, the Jews hiding their identity, or their Morescos, who would be Muslims hiding their identity. In this case, his mother was Jewish from the Morenos, who are hiding their identity. And so you will find Arabic-speaking people all around this region playing very important roles. And this is not just a recent phenomena, too, by the way. In our book, Deeper Roots, right in the beginning, I'm bringing a report of Cyrus Gordon, who found, he's reporting on a chest of treasure, gold coins and silver coins found with a shipwreck in the Caribbean. And the coins, Arabic coins, are there. And these coins date back before Columbus, which shows the presence, again, as we also understood, of Muslims in the region. There are two Spanish-speaking individuals, very prominent, very active, Mujahid Fletcher and Jamie Fletcher, his father. They're from Colombia. And for those who speak Spanish or who have Spanish friends, there's an excellent website, which is www.islaminspanish. It's one word, islaminspanish.org, okay, for Spanish-speaking people. This has got a lot of information, has the Quran translations, it has khutbahs, it has culture. If you know any Spanish-speaking people, take them to this website. Again, islaminspanish.org. It's one word, Islam in Spanish. Now, the father, Mr. Fletcher, alhamdulillah, who has embraced Islam, he was an educated man who worked on the coffee plantations in Colombia. And you know that Colombian coffee is one of the best in the world right now. In one of the plantations that he worked in, they had a museum. And they were reporting in this museum the presence of Yemeni ships who came into the region before Columbus. And they were carrying coffee with them. Because coffee in those days was a Muslim drink. It was Muslims drinking coffee, mainly, coming out of Ethiopia and Yemen. And then the Ottomans were drinking coffee. The Ottomans internationalized it. They came in before Columbus with the coffee, and they planted the trees there, and it flourished. And the soil is very rich in Colombia, and so it became one of the best grades of coffee on the face of the planet Earth. And so an early presence. Right now in the Spanish language, there are approximately 3,000 Spanish words that have Arabic roots. Now, one report that we found is a very interesting one, and it's speaking about Islam in that land. And the writer is saying that they found etched in Arabic on a church in Colombia. It was preserved in the Palacio de la Inquisición in Cartagena, Colombia. And it's interesting because this is the palace of the Inquisition, right? That's where they tortured Muslims, Inquisition. But there was Arabic writing, and it said, Nashar al-Islam bi khawafiq al-alam. It said that Islam spread under waving banners, something to this effect. And now it's a resort. This is a picture, actually, what it looks like now. That area, the Arabic was, written on this. And the interesting thing is that the Arabic written in this Palacio was dated 1317. That's the carbon dating, of the building around, where the writing is. It's 1317. Remember, Columbus supposedly came to America, discovered America, right, in 1492. This is Colombia, Arabic writing in 1317. And so it shows very clearly an early presence of Muslims in the region. And of course, when the Spanish came in, they brought a culture that was at war with Islam. And so the Spanish struggled to destroy everything that was written. This report here, you can find this and other information on this link that I've put here, there, which will show you. And it's interesting because they found the writing on a bell. So this, that Islam spread like this, it was on the bell. Now you see this street here. This is the same street where the Palacio is. And down the end of the street is the the area, the sphere, and the bell is in there. Okay, so this is dated back early times, and you can find more information from this site. So Islam in Colombia today, there are some reports saying there's around 14,000. We know that there's usually more than the official reports. But there are masjids in San Andres and Bogota, Guajira, Nano, Santa Marta. In this picture here, you see there's a masjid. See the green dome? You'll see a masjid in the middle, in between these palm trees. There's actually a masjid. And this is in Colombia. In Venezuela, there's a big population in Venezuela. There's over 100,000 Muslims in Venezuela, right around the Caracas area. And if you look at that picture closely, you'll see the size of the masjid there. This is a massive masjid, which is right downtown in Caracas, in Venezuela. You can see the highway next to it, and you see the size of it, right? So there's a sizable population of Muslims, mainly of Lebanese, Palestinian, Syrian, and Turkish origin. Again, I was part of a group. We were searching for Muslims. So the group broke up in Panama, and I went on to an island called Curacao, which is off the coast of Venezuela. And I came in, I didn't know if there were masjids or not, and I came into the country and I went to the taxi cab driver and I said, "Where is the Muslim church?" Tried to speak into him in his language. He said, "Oh yeah, Muslim church, come." So he took me, and it was a big masjid there in Curacao. The imam was from Lebanon. I spoke to him in Arabic, of course. He was Lebanese imam, very friendly brother, introduced me to the community, and they took me around. There's a strong Palestinian community also there in Curacao off the coast. Also, I found on the Virgin Islands, a strong Palestinian community. They control all the gas stations. There in San Jose, no, this is the Virgin Islands, and St. Thomas, St. Kitts, St. John's, in these islands, strong Palestinian Muslim community. They're very visible there in that area. And so all over the region, that presence is there. Probably one of the biggest presence in the region is in Brazil. And Brazil, naturally being a very fertile country, everything grows and flourishes there. And when I visited Brazil to an OIC conference, we went to the Muslim community, and they told me that there are more Lebanese Muslims in Brazil than in Lebanon. That's how much they flourished. Huge population, big masjids. The community is there. They're about 6 to 7% of the Brazilian population. And also there is an Afro-Muslim population who are descendants of the slaves and political prisoners. You remember 1835, the big revolt? These were the ones who won. Some of them won their freedom and returned to Nigeria. And you can pray in a Brazilian masjid in Lagos, Nigeria, up until today. So this population is expanding and growing. And alhamdulillah, they are actually bringing up now Arabic documents that were written by the slaves and political prisoners who lived in this early period of Muslims in that part of the world. So the presence is there all over the region. But the question is now the awakening. How can we reorganize ourselves? We have people in many different places. But what type of awakenings have we had? The sahwa. What type of awakenings? How can we, rise ourselves up? What happened in the 20th century when the awakenings happened, and what can be done now to improve our situation in the 21st century? So I want to open up the floor for any questions you may have concerning this particular period. This is economic migration of the Muslims to the Americas. Okay, so the floor is open for any questions you may have concerning this topic. Floor is open. Yes, brother.
Is there a particular sect or the Muslims that predominated?
The question is, was there a certain sect or a group of the Muslims that dominated? Generally speaking, amongst the Muslims, the majority would be, as it is in the Muslim world, Ahl Sunnah wa Jama'ah. So the Sunnah is, as it is, in the Muslim world, it is the majority. However, from the Lebanese population and the Syrian population, there were also Shia. So you will find some Shia masjids. In Jamaica, I was downtown. I went into a shop, and his name was Darzi. He was like Druz, right? And he was a businessman. You just think he's an Arab businessman. Jamaicans call everybody Syrian, right? So Lebanese, Palestinian, whatever, just Syrian. Okay, but I went to him and talked to him, and he's Darzi now, right? So those of you who know the Druz, which is an offshoot of the Ismaili Shia, in the 11th century, Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Darzi, who left Egypt and he went to Lebanon. And he formed his own religion. He had his own book and separated. So these are called Druz. But they're not large numbers in the Middle East, and they're not, we don't find them. If they do come, they hide their identity. Itna Ashari Shia, the 12ers, they will organize, and you will find some Shia masjids. But the majority is the Sunnah in these areas. It's the majority. Any questions anybody has, brothers and sisters, concerning this area of economic migration? Floor is open. This period actually continues up until today, because that, to a certain extent, is the reason why Muslims leave their homes and then enter into the Western world. It is to upgrade their situation in life for opportunities, educational opportunities, economic opportunities. And so people are making moves out of the most extreme cases now. We have is even people who are on the boats, who are going across into Italy and all that. And this is a shameful situation, why Muslims should be leaving our lands to go there in such a desperate situation. But this, again, is the struggle that we face. So we need to look at ourselves in terms of the awakening. How can we awaken ourselves and gain the unity again, and gain the izzah, the respect, and the strength that we had as Muslims in the past? Now, floor is open for any general questions anybody has. Go ahead, brother, again.
So have the groups been insular, or have they been able to communicate the message of Islam to I guess,
We find that generally, because they were surviving with their faith, they are generally very insular, inward looking. It's more to survive. So you'll find that in Brazil, for instance, they are not involved that much in dawah. There were groups that came from the Muslim world, Tabligh Jamaat, and Azhar University sent some of its scholars there. And there are some people involved in forms of dawah, but it is not on the level that it should be, and that's part of the awakening that has to happen in the area. When I lived in Jamaica, that was in the 80s, the leader of Jamaica, Michael Manley, he was the head of Socialist International, the International Socialist Group. So the Ba'athist Party of Iraq they had an embassy in Jamaica because Michael Manley was the international president. So I was dying just to speak Arabic and to eat hummus and have my olive oil and things. As I had gotten za'ata. I had gotten used to eating this while I was in Medina. So I went to the Iraqis there and then Lebanese, and they had little shops, not known to the general public. So if you speak Arabic, they let you in, and then there's hummus and baklava and whatever, ful mudammis and anything that you want to remember your culture. But it was very inward looking. Very inward looking. What they did do, the Caribbean people know them because they were itinerant merchants. And you find the Syrians would get goods and they would go into the countryside. And this happened in Trinidad, Jamaica, and all over the Caribbean region. They would carry the goods in the countryside and they would sell the goods and then eventually open up a shop. And now they have department stores. That's all over the region. But they started off carrying the goods on their backs and going into the countryside. And they were not afraid to break cultures. The only unfortunate thing is because most of them did not really have knowledge. So they only had enough knowledge to preserve Islam within themselves and not really to explain to people what Islam was. They would even hide their names and their identities, just to survive, within a Christian environment. So that's generally what was happening to them. But the problem is, and this happened in Canada as well, the third generation, fourth generation, there's nothing left. And so they melt down right into the society. So there are some people you would look at and think that's a British Canadian or a French Canadian, but it's actually somebody who may have had a Lebanese or Syrian background, maybe intermarried with somebody, especially if they were Christians. The Christians got melted right down, right into the society. Muslims have something to hold on to, so they would hold on to more to their religion. But the meltdown process was actually faster amongst the lighter-skinned people. That's the reason why the Jami Mosque, when we originally took over the Jami Mosque in 1970, I don't know if any of the brothers were here in those days. In 1970, we originally took over the Jami Mosque on Dundas here in Toronto. The Muslims who had taken over, who were from the Slavic lands, Albania and the Slavic lands, their Islam had watered down so much that there was no Jumu'ah prayer, and the main gathering was on Sunday afternoon. And on Saturday night, they had a discotheque for the teenagers so they could get together. So they would come in the basement of the mosque and have a little discotheque, to try to keep them away from downtown. That's all that was left of their Islam, right? And so Muslims then came in 1970, and we demanded 5 salats, Jumu'ah, make this a real masjid. A struggle went on and eventually became the Jami Mosque. So this was the struggle that happened with many of the communities. Now, because of the oppression in Albania and in Bosnia and these places, there's a resurgence. People are coming back into Islam. That is one of the good parts of the unfortunate situation that they have been in.
You often hear of people saying that manner in which that Muslims are able to go out to places like Indonesia and they were merchants and they were trading in good manners.
Yeah.
It impressed the natives there so much that they eventually wanted to sort of ask about Islam and some knowledge. Is there something unique in that period of time?
Well, what it is, the question is that what's the difference between what happened in the Americas and Southeast Asia? The difference is that the people who came here generally as merchants, they came under a colonial master. So the colonial master called them into America or into Canada, into Brazil, the Portuguese, and they gave them contracts and allowed them to do business. But they were under a colonial regime. What happened in Southeast Asia is that the Arab Muslims from Hadramaut, they were from Yemen, from the south, especially Hadrama, who have a history of scholarship, and they were merchants as well, and the Omanis, but especially the Hadramaut. And they have great ulama who came from Hadramaut as well. So when they went over on their own. There's no colonial master. They were traveling those sea routes before the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. The Omanis had reached Korea on the oceans. So that was their ocean. They knew the ocean. So when they got Islam, they were already on the oceans. Now they took ulama with them. You see? But the connection was there already. Whereas in this case, it was a completely new situation dominated by Christians or secularists. And Muslims had to come into this and literally survive with their Islam. It was a miracle if your second generation children were still Muslim. It's like a miracle if you could maintain it. Whereas in the case of the Hadramaut Omani Muslims, they were champions of Islam. They had ulama with them on the boats. It's a completely different situation. Good question, though. Yeah. He was. So he was Portuguese Muslim? To Christianity. Yeah. So there was a lot of intermingling, going on between the groups. And the brother is saying, he has a Brazilian Muslim family. And remember now, amongst the Portuguese, the people who were coming over on the boats with the Portuguese, many of them were Muslims who hid their identities, right? And Jews who hid their identities. So they are many of the families that are very wealthy in Brazil right now. It's all over the Caribbean too. They're the wealthy families. And amongst them, the minority were Muslims as well. And so there was an attachment that is there from, that old society. But that is a very interesting story in terms of that. There's a lot of things happening in Brazil now. I think one of the big cutoff points between Brazil and many of the other parts of the world is language, because Portuguese. Because the Spanish, you get more, and then English, you have more connection. But the Portuguese sort of locked them in, with Portugal and, Cape Verde Islands and, these areas, the Portuguese colonies, Mozambique and Angola. So they were locked into the Portuguese lands. Right? But this is now changing with the spread of English and also with Muslims who are traveling across barriers and entering different countries. Now, any other general questions anybody has before we close down? So, yeah, go ahead. Yes, brother.
Had some reports about slavery in Mauritania.
Yeah.
Is it like an attempt to tarnish this country, or what's happening?
Okay, well, slavery itself, again, this is another whole big question in itself. Slavery was an international institution in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Everybody had slaves. Chinese, European, African, Arab. The word slave comes from Slav, right? Because Slavic people were being captured by the Romans and made slaves, right? So it was an international order. Islam came and it abolished all the negative aspects within slavery. The punishment, the rape, the hunting for slaves, all of that. The only thing that remained was prisoners of war. And what Islam instituted was what is called, what I would call bonded servants. They were servants. They were not slave like we know slave, whipped and beaten and all that. No, they were servants, and they were integrated into the society. And the general intention of Islam was to eventually abolish slavery, because the Prophet ﷺ abolished it. He freed the slaves. There's no slave raiding in his time, or in the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, no slave trade, no slave raiding. So that was way. But some of the kings who came later, they reinstituted that. In the desert region of West Africa, in the Sahara, there were different groups. There were the Amazigh, Berber people who come across and take you across the desert. And there were the Hassaniya Arabs who maintained a lot of the traditions in that area. And there were also people who were at some points, for whatever the reason is, enslaved, especially coming from the area of Senegal. But they became a class within the society of Mauritania. So it became almost like a class of people. Okay? And that is something which the whole of the Muslim world recognizes now, should be abolished. And because they are so cut off in the desert, they maintain this class system amongst them. Again, it's nothing to do with Shari'a. Islam would not allow that. And it was used to tarnish Muslims. Also in the Sudan, the missionaries were saying there was slavery in the Sudan, when there was no slavery, and they found out it was a hoax. It never really happened. In Mauritania, however, there was a class of people, and there still is some of the people who are suffering from a class struggle that goes on within Mauritania between the lighter-skinned Arabs and the Senegalese who are there. There is a class struggle that goes on, which Islam would abolish. If real Islam was instituted, it would break that down. So it is being phased out. And really, according to many of the great scholars, in what I've read and spoken to, there's no need for us to go back into slavery at this point in time in the 21st century. That's an ancient system that was used at that time. Islam was controlling it and getting rid of it, and there's no need for us to go back to it actually today, because it's not recognized internationally anyway. So there's no need to go back to any system like that, any system which can turn into oppression immediately. Okay? Yes, brother.
The Ottoman Empire, during its, prior to its, demise, what sort of trading relationships did they have with Latin American colonies? Do you know? And also, were there any outward efforts to make any serious attempts at dawah in these lands?
The Ottomans were actually very tied up. Even when Granada fell in 1492, the 15th century, 16th century, they were tied up with great wars that were going on in the eastern side, in Austria, in all the Slavic lands. So they did not really involve themselves much. They sent boats to help the Andalusians, but they couldn't even send their armies over there. And then within the last few hundred years, they did not have a presence in the other lands on the other sides. It is said, though, that after the fall of Granada in 1492, when the Muslims were fighting back against the Spanish, many of the Muslims who went over to Algeria and to Morocco with the Turks became what they call corsairs, or the Barbary pirates, right? They were not pirates in the way we know pirates today, right? Pirates of the Caribbean, and Blackbeard and Bluebeard. No, it was not like this. They were fighting against the Spanish. So they were literally attacking Spanish boats on the seas. And then the Spanish called them Barbary pirates, right? But it was Turks, North Africans, Andalusians, who were actually fighting back against the Spanish trade. And the fight actually spilled over into the South America. And we discussed that a little bit in an earlier session, about how some of them even landed in America. But they were not strong enough to do dawah. Most of them couldn't even survive with their Islam. They could not survive. Because when you're living in a society that's totally against you, and it prohibits your religion, you can't speak your language. You have to change your name. Your children have very little chance. And your children's children will get watered down. We're seeing it today. Bilals, nice Bilals in the masjid, outside, remember? Billy. Ali in the masjid, and Al when he goes across to the plaza. That's the meltdown process. And this, of course, the cure to this is to understand the concept of resurgence, awakening, is what we call al-ihya al-islami, right? To revive Islam. And that, inshallah, we will look at the resurgence in the 20th century and get a few pointers as to the resurgence in the 21st century, which will be our last session, inshallah, next Wednesday. Billahi tawfiq. Have a safe journey home. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.